I want to bring in Paul Viollis, who's CEO of Viollis Group. He's also a security consultant. Paul, when you're seeing these images of people on the tarmac at this U.S. airport in Fort Lauderdale, what do you make of this?
Well, you know what, Rena, I mean, it's certainly something that we have to be concerned about with respect to what the genesis was of this attack, who the individual was, and what the motivation was. But first and foremost, as we examine this, as all viewers watch this, you have to understand that the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, the Broward County Sheriff's Office, is going to be responsible for the containment side of this, and that's going to limit the amount of information that's going to be presented to the media at first. But that's important because right now they really have to decide. We understand that there's one person in custody, but it's a very fluid situation. So they're going to have to ascertain, has there been a second shooter, a third shooter, or are we just down to one shooter? Has it been completely contained? And
we don't know yet if there are multiple shooters, but for right now we believe from eyewitnesses on the ground that the situation, according to people who are watching there, appears to be not as chaotic as before. One eyewitness we did speak to, Paul, just a couple seconds ago, said he heard at least a dozen shots fired. You know, how is it possible that somebody was able to walk in with a gun to this area?
Well, you know what, Rena, that's really a good question, because when you think about an airport, think about outer perimeter and inner perimeter, go back to 9/11 days, and you know that, and we all know this, when we went to the airport post 9/11, the outer perimeter, or where vehicles had access to coming on the property, there were checkpoints out there, right? And we remember that, and they were checking vehicles and undercarriage search, et cetera. As time went by, we stopped that, and our perimeter moved in. So now the perimeter is actually where the TSA is actually checking ID. So if you can pull right into the baggage claim or baggage handling without any screening whatsoever, which is exactly what apparently happened here. So by moving that perimeter in and moving it closer towards really access to the aircraft, and it allows for situations such as this.
I want to remind our viewers here, if we can go back to the split screen image that we had earlier, to let you know, this was, of course, the map that we were showing. But this split screen you see here, the left side of your screen, you're looking at Terminal 2, which is where we believe this is actually the outer perimeter of the airport here. Terminal 2 vicinity, I believe this is leading toward the arrival section that police have now cordoned off. On your right side there, that's the lower level where you can see the bags are brought in. This is the Delta area, as you can see, that our eyewitnesses have told us, and you can see the Delta markings there as well. Paul, I want to ask you, a lot of people are maybe wondering at this hour, we were talking about how somebody with a gun was able to get in, but multiple shots, according to one eyewitness, dozens of shots fired at this point. We don't know if this was a domestic or whether this was some sort of terrorism related, but what are you hearing?
Well, what I'm hearing is the same. Unfortunately, what I'm hearing is the same thing you're hearing at this point. And there's so many different stories, Rena, when we get the early parts of actor-shooter situations like this, that we have to be careful as to what we believe in until we know what's really valid. But to your point, as far as with respect to the weapon of choice, the weapon of choice and the rounds used as police investigate this are going to help isolate on what the actual mission was of the shooter. Was this a potential terrorist issue? Was it a workplace violence issue? Was it a domestic violence issue? What was it? They'll be able to ascertain that going forward. Why the multiple shots? Clearly because of the type of weapon that was used. Was it a rifle? Was it a handgun? Was it an automatic? Was it a semi-automatic? These things will flush out, in the hours to come.
And again, this is just a breaking story that's developing at this hour. Just a little bit before 1 p.m. Eastern, there were reports of shots being fired at Fort Lauderdale Airport. The incident happened in the baggage claim area, so that would lead one to assume this person with the gun did not have to go through any sort of TSA checkpoint to get into the airport there. It appears to be outside of the terminal. I'm wondering, though, Paul, if this incident will now set up concerns to airports across America, if even more of a security perimeter needs to be in place.
You know, Rena, the biggest part of that question and the most poignant part of your question is the fact that we understand this risk exists and we see what happened today, but will we be willing to incorporate a much more increased budget for security to push that perimeter back and add people and personnel? And then also it becomes a convenience issue where the general public will have to come back and say, we really don't want to be inconvenienced. We don't have to wait. We don't have to get to the airport an hour before we get there already. So those are going to be the two factors that are going to play into whether or not we move the perimeter back. We see what happens. Clearly, Rena, we see what happens when you move it in. if we move it back, those are the two factors that will be taken into consideration.
Every time we do some sort of an airport shooting, Paul, we talk about Israel Airport there in Tel Aviv, one of the most secure airports in the world. It's hard not to discuss it, but they do have an outer perimeter. And every time I mention this with Chris Van Cleve, our transportation correspondent, one of the first things he mentions is, you know, it's a much smaller airport when you compare it to other airports, larger airports in bigger cities in the U.S. And as you mentioned, money is one of the key factors people mention, whether there's enough money in the budget and whether there's also the stomach for people to deal with having that security perimeter added, because there are probing questions and a lot of people feel it's a bit of an invasion of your privacy. We are confirming at this hour, Paul, to our viewers who are just joining us, CBS News is now reporting that 3 people are dead in this shooting that took place at Fort Lauderdale Airport. We are hearing multiple people have been injured, possibly as many as 9 people. Eyewitnesses on the ground said emergency personnel and including police were very quick to respond within seconds. One eyewitness we spoke to today said that there was extreme bleeding from one man that people were able to try and stop. The scene was very graphic, and as you can see, the people that were stopped at this tarmac and forced to wait are now moving what appears to be back inside the airport. We've been following the situation again at Fort Lauderdale Airport. Paul, when you talk about securing the area here, you mentioned that Miami-Dade police will be involved in this. Do federal authorities weigh in on this, and how does that work?
It does. It's a collaborative effort. So you'll have Fort Lauderdale Police Department, you'll have the Broward County Sheriff's Office, you'll have the local faction of the FBI, all converge on this, as well as probably ATF will converge on it. The thing for people to understand that our viewers need to know is that these different law enforcement agencies practice this consistently, and the collaborative effort is something that has been instituted, especially in Broward County, Florida, for some time now. So that's why you see, Rena, that really quick response, because it's a well-oiled machine. You can expect these efforts are going to be broken down now. Part of the responsibility will go to different agencies. So, for example, the airport authority may be sitting down right now, they probably are, examining closed-circuit television views of this particular individual, and when he came on property, did he come on property in a vehicle? If so, what the plate number was he with somebody else? That's what they're probably doing. Then you've got also, you know, the FBI side that's going to be looking at it more from the counterterrorist side. You have the sheriff's office that's probably going to assume access control of shooting down or shutting down the airport property itself and allowing access in and out. So each, as collaborative as it will be, each will have their own function working in concert with each other.
We are just getting word at this hour about, as I just reported, that there were 9 people who were shot and 3 people confirmed dead at this hour. Paul, we've been hearing from our Chris Van Cleve, our transportation correspondent, who's reporting on this, saying that the FAA is reporting the south side of this airport is the only functioning and operating side of this airport right now. Terminal 2, which is where the shots were fired, still remains closed. Are you surprised that part of this airport is still up and running?
No, because again, this really comes, Rena, this really comes to the efficiency and the collaborative effort of law enforcement. This is something that they're going to practice. So the reason why they're not going to have to shut down the entire airport against a very large airport, because they've already, based on just protocol, they've already ascertained where the risk was, where it was contained, and that's the area that they're going to shut down. It does not appear to them at this point that there's other areas of the airport that present a risk, so they'll keep that open because you have 2 factors. You have one, obviously, the safety of all human personnel. That is the most important thing everyone will take into consideration. The second part is the business aspect of the function, the operational functionality of the airport itself. Because there's a huge business there, Reno, that we know. We have to keep the planes going, but it has to be a measured response. So that's why I'm not surprised at that.
If you're joining us just now, we're following the breaking situation unfolding at Fort Lauderdale Airport. 3 people confirmed dead, 9 wounded in a shooting that took place. An eyewitness confirming to CBS News that he said there were at least 12 shots fired. He was traveling with his family. They took cover. He said that there was absolute panic. He was sitting by the window at the time the shots were fired, and people started running away. One eyewitness said he saw a man bleeding profusely, that emergency personnel were trying to stop the bleeding of this man, and he was taken to the hospital. This eyewitness also said that law enforcement responded within seconds trying to contain the situation there, and that people disappeared in a matter of seconds as soon as they heard the gunshot. Paul, what goes on now in the investigation? What will police be trying to ascertain as they're looking and trying to get the facts?
Great question, Rena. So basically, let's go back to the perimeter. We're going to start from the outer perimeter in. The first part police are going to have to identify is the shooter. So they'll use different types of technology that's available to them, facial recognition, et cetera, going to the closed-circuit television cameras to see where he came on the property. This is going to also tell them if there are other people involved, who they are, where they went, and follow them forensically from the time they came in onto the present. That's the first step. The second is the second thing is that they need to identify the shooter. This is really, really important. And that's what they're going to be moving quickly towards, and that's why you're going to see both the Sheriff's Department, the PD, and the FBI working closely on that. The sooner they can get a positive ID on a shooter, they can go to the court, look for search warrants, so that they can go and start seizing information such as telephones, laptops, vehicles, etc., that will give them information about how this happened, who else was involved, and what the actual mission statement was of the shooter.
Knowing what we know, that this happened outside of the TSA checkpoint area in Terminal 2, the baggage claim area, which anybody can pretty much walk up to, what do you think will be running through the minds of people dealing with security and trying to secure America's airports? Is there any sort of takeaway lesson from this?
Well, there is, and I can tell you, Rena, that our airport authorities have done an exceptional job over the years in really trying to work in the confines of what they're allowed to implement with respect to security and access control. What's on the minds of people right now, I can tell you, just as the internal side, is people that are in the know that are going to sit back and say, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because we know where we're weak, we know where we're vulnerable. And that comes really a marriage between what we want to have for security. You brought up an excellent point that Chris mentioned, talking about the airport in Israel. What we can do, what we can't do, what we're willing to pay for, and what convenience we're willing to sacrifice in order to have that level of security. I believe that's really the biggest question.
Paul Viollis, CEO of Viollis Group, a security consultant. Paul, I appreciate you joining us with this breaking news.
Tyler, my pleasure, Rena. Thank you.
Thank you.